In 1944, German pilots heard whispers of a new American bomber, something so large, so advanced it sounded impossible. They laughed, calling it an engineer's fantasy, a flying fortress that would never survive real combat. But this machine wasn't built to survive. It was built to dominate the sky, to reach cities no other bomber could touch. And then, the laughter stopped when they saw the B-29 rising higher than any interceptor could reach, and then watched it drop fire that turned night into a new kind of daylight. The proof burned across the horizon, in the factories that vanished, in the cities that melted, and in the silence that followed the roar of its engines. In just 1 year, from 1944 to 1945, the Superfortress rewrote the laws of air warfare, proving that fear could fall from 30,000 feet. They first heard about it as a whisper, sketches on a desk, a silhouette cut out of rumor, a long, clean fuselage with a glassy nose, 4 swollen engine nacelles, and a tail that seemed too tall to be practical. In Luftwaffe ready rooms, men joked that the Americans had built a new billboard, not a bomber. They had shredded B-17s and B-24s for years. Another heavy? Fine. Big targets just made for big victories. They were wrong, and they were fortunate. They never had to learn how wrong over their own cities. The airplane was Boeing's B-29 Superfortress. On paper, it looked like something to mock. Pressurized cabins, a crawl tunnel over a bomb bay, electrically driven remote turrets guided by computing sites. It felt more laboratory than battlefield, but the Superfortress wasn't a gimmick. It was a flying ecosystem whose parts worked together to change the physics of bombing. At its heart roared 4 Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclones. They were difficult, hot-running engines at first. They demanded respect, but fed by turbo superchargers, they pushed the B-29 into the thin blue above 30,000 feet. Air that punished fighters, blunted flak, and favored long wings and patient navigation. The fuselage carried 2 pressurized compartments, fore and aft, joined by a tube you could crawl through on your elbows, while a winter of stratosphere howled inches away. The guns, 1050 caliber Brownings, and on early Tales, a 20mm cannon, sat in streamlined pods. A gunner looked into a sight, dialed a target, and the central fire control. Computer-assigned turrets like a chess, player placing rooks. Less drag, more brain. This wasn't a bigger B-17, it was a different animal. In 1944, the Luftwaffe's experience made skepticism easy. They had learned the dead zones of the flying fortress, how to rake a formation from the front, how to crack a bomber stream with rockets and 30mm bursts that turned aluminum into confetti. They had invented tactics that made daylight heavies die. But as intelligence briefs thickened, something else appeared in the margins. The Americans were spending an ocean of money and genius on a bomber that could fly across oceans. They were building airfields on islands no one had heard of. They were training crews not to survive weather, but to use it. The first B-29 raids came from the edge of plausibility. From India and China, crews staged over the Himalayas, the hump, just to fuel the bombers that would strike Japanese targets and limp back. It was a logistical dare. Engines flamed out, jet streams scattered formations and threw Norden bomb sites off by blocks. Yet the point wasn't that it was easy. The point was that it was now possible to hurt the Japanese homeland from bases thousands of miles away. Then came the step change. The Marianas fell, Saipan, Tinian, Guam. On those specks of coral, the Seabees drew ruler straight. Runways across the Pacific map, and the B-29 found a permanent home. What had been experimental from China became factory regular from the Marianas. Daylight precision at altitude began against engines, steelworks, aircraft plants. Crews breathed dry air through oxygen masks, inside warm bubbles, while frost wrote lace on the windows. They learned the new arithmetic of winds so strong that a bomber's ground speed could yo-yo from crawling to sprinting between checkpoints. They learned to bomb by radar when clouds ate the islands below. The Japanese climbed to meet them. Ki-44s and Ki-84s, grinding into air that stole horsepower. They discovered the Superfortress could concentrate its moving guns with surgical cruelty. A single attacker could find 3 turrets stitching space in front of his nose. A geometry of tracers that turned bravery into statistics. Flak rose in black clocks that looked harmless, until you watched a ship stagger away with perforated wings and 2 props windmilling like crossed bones. The B-29 was vulnerable. Everything in war is. But it was vulnerable on terms it often chose. And then a blunt Ohioan named Curtis. LeMay walked into the story and changed the method. At high altitude, in daylight, the jet stream chewed accuracy. So he reversed the table, fly low at night, strip most of the guns to save weight, and change what you drop. Not steal, fire. The weapon was the M69 jellied. Fuel in a small canister with a fuse that made it tumble, bite into wood and tatami, then burst into a petaled flame. Japanese cities were not stone. They were light and dry and connected by air. On the night of March 9th at 10, Mighty 5, the B-28, came to Tokyo at altitudes that would have been suicide over Germany. The sky turned orange. Streets became lines of flame. Canals reflected a moving aurora of heat. The bombers created their own wind, fire pulling air, air feeding fire, fire jumping neighborhoods in seconds. When the crews returned, some said they could smell lacquer and paper burned into their clothes. This is where laughter dies. Not in arguments about specifications, but in the glow that crawls along a horizon and refuses to go out. For German pilots reading neutral cables, the lesson was technical and strategic. The B-29 was not just big, it multiplied reach. It allowed a staff officer to point at a dot on a far ocean and say, "Tonight, then make that plan happen without risking." Carriers or armies first. It attacked the daily life of a nation. Rail hubs, ports, housing for workers, the wood and paper capillaries that fed, factories, faster than defenses could adapt. It's honest to tell the other side of the ledger. The Superfortress was a handful. Early R-3350s caught fire if mishandled. Cow flaps demanded a ritual of settings. Mixture and turbo boost needed finesse over water, where there was nowhere to land. Crews learned a new kind of fear, engine temperatures, creeping up like a fever that would not break. Search and rescue in the vast Pacific saved many, missed some, and left a silence that squadrons felt at breakfast. The airplane asked a price and men paid it. Japan fought back with the tools at hand. Night fighters climbed with cannon fitted to fire upward into bellies. Radar nets widened. Searchlights fenced patches of sky. Barrage balloons and flak pockets forced course changes. But the defense suffered a problem math could not correct. Too few aircraft, too little fuel, too much sky. When hundreds of B-29s moved, interception became a lottery. What if the B-29 had come to Europe? German pilots asked the question in memoirs with the honesty that comes after defeat. The Me-262 could run down any propeller bomber. The Ta-152H could scrape oxygen from the edge of space. The Me-163 rocket could slash through a formation like a thrown knife. But none of those answers existed in numbers large enough to smother an American airplane that mixed altitude, range, radar pathfinding, and mass production. The Superfortress wasn't invincible. It was inevitable, and inevitability is worse for morale. The B-29's list of firsts mattered in cockpits more than magazines. Pressurization meant sharp thinking at altitude. Remote turrets reduced drag and let gunners fight as a team. One brain switching multiple guns against a single threat. Central fire control added computation to instinct. Long wings and clean aerodynamics turned fuel into distance. Radar bombing turned weather into a curtain you could see through electrically. It was not one miracle. It was 20 good ideas welded into a single airframe and then cloned by the tens of thousands of man-hours America could afford. Spring rolled into summer. City after city felt a new weather, a forecast of heat. Railways became black necklaces of cratered beads. Ports wore smoke like scarves. And then the Superfortress carried something with a different grammar from fire. Specially prepared B-29s, lighter, leaner, took off with weapons whose names the world would never unlearn. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. The moral argument is a human one, and it belongs to more than an airplane. The technical fact is plain. Only a platform with the B-29's range, altitude, payload, and reliability could have put those weapons on those coordinates and brought the crews home to report what happened. The war ended. The B-29 did not disappear with it. Children pressed their faces to museum glass and wondered why a bomber would have a tunnel through its heart. The Soviet Union reverse-engineered interned Superfortresses into the Tu-4. New wars used the shape even as jets rushed past. The piston age surrendered with grace but did not surrender overnight. So what happened to the laughter? Time happened. Experience happened. Men who had hunted American formations over Europe understood, in their bones, what it would have meant to see Superfortresses passing above the familiar altitudes, or descending at night with incendiaries to write a headline across a German skyline already used to headlines. The B-29 did not win the war alone. Nothing does. But it changed the speed at which strategy could be applied, the distance at which decisions could be enforced, and the temperature at which a city could burn. Remember the 6 truths from our opening. Subject: the German pilot who laughed. Action: he laughed because that is what pride does in a ready room. Objective: end state change. The B-29's purpose was to carry destruction farther, higher, surer than any bomber before it. Contrast born until the first nights when the horizon burned and jokes turned to silence. Proof: the tonnage dropped, the factories stilled, the trains that never arrived, the populations that fled to shelters that could not breathe. Time: in the span of 12 months from Mariana's build-up to the war's end, the Superfortress redrew the Pacific map and the vocabulary of strategic bombing. Look again at that silhouette the German pilots mocked. Long fuselage, smooth wings, greenhouse nose, big radial engines fat with ambition. It looks almost gentle in a museum. It was not gentle in use. It was an argument made of aluminum, that logistics, engineering, and training can add up to a force larger than any one crew, any one squadron, any one island on a map. The B-29 proved that argument at altitude. It made distance small, it made time elastic, and it made the sky for a year that mattered into a place where a city could be decided by men who had never seen it from the ground. In the end, the laughter that greeted the Superfortress belongs to the beginning of the story, not the end. The end belongs to the crews who learned to nurse hot engines across black water, to the navigators who read a moonlit ocean like a book, to the gunners who fought with electrons rather than elbows, and to the planners who looked at a chain of islands and saw not isolation but runways. The B-29 was the last and greatest of the piston giants, a bridge from one age of war to another. And for anyone who once smirked at its complexity, the final lesson was simple. Do not laugh at a machine built to change the weather of history. Because when those 4 engines turned and the bomb bay doors opened, the joke ended, and the sky, cold, thin, indifferent, delivered its proof.